Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome back to tonight's second half. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it definitely matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? Tonight's first encounter comes to us from Tennessee. It's a feral person experience. Tonight's first encounter is a feral person experience out of Tennessee. I have a friend named Mike who lives near Irwin, Tennessee, along with his wife and their dog. Mike and his wife had 2 encounters with the feral human. One encounter as recent as April of 2021. Mike said the first encounter was back in June of 2019 when him and his wife were in their living room watching TV at around 8 p.m. They both were startled when they looked up and saw a deformed man's face appear in their window. Mike's wife literally yelled out of fright. It stared at them and gave them an evil smile and ran off into the woods. They called the police. The police searched the yard and the tree line, but found nothing. At around 11 p.m., while they were in bed, Mike and his wife, who couldn't sleep and had a gun nearby, heard disturbing laughter from outside of their window. The laugh was a lunatic-type laugh. Mike took his gun and went to the door and out to his porch where he yelled, "Get out of here," and shot 2 rounds into the ground. Mike saw not 1 but 2 wild men run from behind his shed into the woods. Mike was disturbed at the sight of them that he shut and locked the door and returned to his bed with his wife, but they both did not sleep that night. The next morning, Mike's wife routinely lets their dog out. The dog will go and do her business, then always come back to the front door scratched to be let back in. Their dog has not been seen again since his wife let her outside that morning. Back in April of 2021, Mike's wife had another sighting. She was returning home from the supermarket and was unloading groceries from their truck when something up in the trees grabbed her attention. She saw a deformed man up in the tree staring at her, grinning wildly. She got back into the truck and left and drove to her husband's office. They both don't know what to do because the police are finding nothing, and they feel like they are not being taken seriously by law enforcement. Mike has installed several security cameras. The description of the wild man is taller than 6 foot, thin but toned body, long dark hair on their heads with patches of hair throughout their body, pale gray-like skin, long fingernails. Only 1 tooth in its mouth, or so it seems. Eyes are large and wide and are black. Looks like a man/Bigfoot/troll mix. Deformed features on their face and head. Update: Mike did locate the dog about 0.8 of a mile in the woods, dead. The dog was not in great condition, and we will not go into details, but the fur color is how he recognized his dog. To be conservative, there was not much left except fur and bones. The wife does believe the feral man is responsible. Mike and his wife continue to have sightings, but mostly in the trees. They have excluded the police because the police never find anything and have told Mike and his wife that they are most likely seeing campers throughout the woods. Mike's wife is aware when these creatures are around, because there is a very distinct odor. The wife seems to be having more sightings than Mike. They believe that the feral human are more interested in her. They've had one additional scare of something peeking through their window and describe the face as looking like an evil Smeagol from Lord of the Rings, describing the hit and miss strings of long hair on an almost bare scalp. They have both heard that lunatic-type laugh in the woods at night. It's not an everyday occurrence, but they are afraid. They're mindful and careful. Mike says it's one of those things where you try to live with it, but stay out of the woods and stay armed, just in case. His wife is sure that these feral men are not Bigfoot or campers just messing around. Encounter. As a police officer, I spend time dealing with things that scare people, things they cannot and do not want to try and explain. I'm usually the person that gets the call to go and check things out that go bump in the night. And in fact, I usually work alone in the middle of nowhere. I've run across and seen things that I cannot rightly explain. This was probably the first time in my career I had been in a supernatural situation. Now it's happened before in life, but police-wise, this was the starting point of what has turned out to be a very interesting career. One night, tail end of July, I'm cruising back country roads trying to find some trouble to get into. As the only deputy out in the county that night, I had been pretty busy up to that point. Then the calls started to slack off at around midnight. I hadn't seen a single soul for a couple hours and decided, hey, I'll be proactive a bit. The night was hot. I had the window rolled down. I'd been driving for a couple hours straight with no luck at finding anything. The only thing I scared up was a few rabbit and fox. I decided to stop and stretch my legs and answer nature's call. I pulled to a stop in a particular empty part of the county. I had driven on the road a few times. It's mostly old abandoned farmhouses and barns. No one has lived in this area. And it made a good target for thieves trying to steal copper or whatever they could get their hands on. On the left side of the road was nothing but cornfield as far as the eye could see. It's getting close to harvest time. The stalks are close to 7 to 8 feet tall in a sea of green. On the right side of the truck is an old abandoned apple orchard. I never did get the full story of how the land came to be abandoned. It had something to do with multiple mistresses, multiple wills, illegitimate children, and other nonsense, the result of which was 150 acres of fruit tree that had become its own little forest over 20 or so years it had been unattended. I'm sitting in the truck, head laid back, just enjoying my little break. I had closed my eyes for just a second, and when I opened them, I looked out into the cornfield and made direct eye contact with something. At first, I thought it was a person, and it almost gave me a heart attack right there. The thing stood 7 feet tall. Its eyes were human, but they shone in the night like an animal's eyes. I'm not a weak person. I've done more stupid and foolish things in my lifetime than I care to remember or admit. I've been afraid before, and I'm not afraid of admitting that. There was something about those eyes that absolutely terrified me, though. So I did what any normal, sane, 22-year-old kid would do. I chased it. I kept eye contact with the thing, slowly rolling up my window without braking. I checked out with dispatch over the radio and grabbed my patrol rifle off its mount above me. I remember taking a deep breath and then throwing open the door, jumping out of the truck, yelling, "Sheriff's office," in the most authoritative voice I could muster. I maintained eye contact for the entire time, except right as my vision crossed the A-pillar of the driver's side. As soon as my boots touched the dirt of the road, that creature was gone. I caught nothing but a blur as a black and brown shape vaulted across the road and ran into the trees. Once again, I let my sense of self-invincibility get the better of me. I kicked the door closed on the truck and took off, yelling, "Stop!" I stumbled into the forest and was hit with the most overpowering scent. It was a combination of unwashed person, BO, and animal musk. I still remember the smell vividly after all of these years. I've been around rotting bodies. That didn't impact me as much as this smell did. I've never really been a particular fast runner. I've not ever cared much for it and always been more of a short burst kind of guy. Whatever I was going after was fast, though. It didn't dawn on me until much later that it was probably just playing with me, leading me further into the miniature forest. I would catch a black blur moving off in the distance. I would hear a branch break or a sound off to the side. I stumbled around like this for a good 15 minutes before my bravado and adrenaline wore off, and I decided that I should head back to the truck because I was alone and scared at this point. The whole way back, I had that itch between my shoulder blades like I was being watched, like I was the intruder in someone else's domain. I made it out of the trees and back to the truck. It was in the same place I had left it, but the driver's side door was open and the dome light on, and the vehicle turned off with the key still in the ignition. I knew I hadn't locked the door, but I knew I left the car running. I didn't often turn it off during my shift. I checked the truck, making sure it was empty. That same smell filled the cab of the truck. It was in the seats and carpets, like something had sat there in my seat and just wallowed around in it. I started the truck and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't tell anyone about the encounter. I just told dispatch that I thought I saw something that turned out to be nothing and left it at that. About a year later, during one of the few times I rotated to days and had a partner to work with, I'm driving around on the opposite side of the county. I had just cleared a cattle call, playing cowboy, pushing steers back into a fence when my partner called, wanting to know where I was. He was scared, and I could hear it in his voice. I let him know where I was, and he asked if I could meet him in the southwest part of the county. There's an old gin down there. It just happened to be the same general area of my experience a year prior. I had never told him about this, but I agreed to meet with him. The experience I got from him was that he had pulled into the same cornfield from a year earlier, not too far from where my experience took place. He had backed into a turn row that was used to maintain the pivot. He decided to stop there and get a couple of minutes of rest. It was Sunday morning, and like most of our Sundays, nothing really happened until after lunch when people started to get active. My partner had dozed off for a couple of minutes and had been woken by his truck being violently shaken back and forth with a dust cloud dissipating around him. He first thought it was just me messing around with him. When he got out to check, he told me that he smelled a nasty, putrid stank. Not finding anything out of the ordinary, he went back to his truck and drove away. He drove down to the gin, got out, and walked around the place to make sure there was no one there. When he went to get back in his truck, he noticed a handprint on the top part of its window. Now, anyone else who has ever driven a truck down a dirt road will tell you handprints on vehicles fill with dust and stand out. He saw the print, freaked out, and called me. Right over his head on top part of the door and the cab of the truck was the biggest handprint I had ever seen. I have average hands for my size. It was easily bigger than two of my hands. I told him my experience. He described the smell nearly the same as I did. Neither of us ever found what was living down there. I heard a few stories over the time. I even ran across one guy who was convinced it was West Texas version of Bigfoot. Today's third encounter. When I was 10, my family was moving back to our hometown from El Paso, where my dad was stationed on a base there. Our realtor was showing us houses, so we pulled up to this house, and it's overgrown with brush and ugly crabgrass, the sidewalks uneven and jagged, and even missing in some places. The white siding is pretty much brown by this point, with tree branches overhanging almost every inch of the roof, so all you can see is a cave-like entrance into the front door. The realtor informs us, oh yeah, it's been on the market for years and there is no electricity, so you'll be seeing it in the dark. We go inside and the sight that hits us is remarkably depressing. There's broken picture frames and glass all over the floor, as well as red splotches of some sort of powder covering everything. A very large chest in the center of the living room, about 5 feet from the front door. The house reeks like something old and wet, yet fresh and rotting at the same time. No one noticed the smell but me. We leave the living room, and all I remember next is going to look into the garage. Now remember, the realtor told us there was no electricity, and we would be seeing the house in the dark. The singular light bulb in the garage was glowing blue. Not a bright iridescent blue by any means, but a sickly dim blue that was just bright enough to illuminate the walls and floor, and bathe the garage in the same shade of blue it was radiating. My parents and the realtor both made the comment that that's weird and maybe there was some sort of charge going into the light through the power lines. I could care less because what I was staring at was worse than any creepy light that was working when it shouldn't have been. There was something inside of the garage. It looked like a human, or maybe what used to be a human, but it appeared wet. Its skin looked like if you had grabbed it, it would just slip right off. You could see veins through its skin, which was so pale it seemed to be almost see-through. This thing was emaciated. I could see all of its ribs. I could see its hip bones. Its arms and legs consisted of just enough fat on the thighs and upper arms that you could tell that's what they were, and not just sticks slapped on a lump of flesh. The neck was just long enough to appear to be proportionately weird, and the head was turned looking straight at me, if you could even say it was looking. Because where normal eyes would be, there were just holes. There were stringy clumps of hair hanging from the tops and side of its head, and I got a sick sense that it was happy to see me, almost as if it was thinking that finally I could tell if it stood up it would be tall. Almost ceiling height, so 8 feet. I was watching this thing crawl on all floors. Think hands and very long feet, not hands and knees. From the center of the garage directly under that blue light. It crossed in front of me, and my family and the realtor disappeared into the wall. It kept its head turned on me the whole time and I followed it with my eyes the whole time. I don't remember even feeling scared in that traditional sense. I felt invited, I felt intrigued, and more than anything, I felt like it had been waiting for me, and just me. I felt like it was telling me, come in and make yourself at home, you're welcome here. My parents decided that they were thoroughly creeped out, though, and without seeing the rest of the house, we left. They told me that they weren't interested, and that was it. We fired our real estate person shortly after because they made a habit of showing us abandoned houses in the dark. I was the only person who saw that creature, but my parents, after thinking I was asleep in the car on the way home, started talking about how once they opened the garage door, they felt like we were trespassing, like someone was watching us. Also, that it felt colder all of a sudden than the rest of the house, smelled like rotting meat, and something just wasn't right about that blue light. Tonight's fourth experience. This has been bothering me for a while now. I'd like to start by saying that everything I'm going to share with you is true, and if you don't believe me, I'm sorry. I live in the woods in northwest Ohio. My house is about 1.5 miles back into the woods down a long driveway. My property is surrounded by trees on each side except the back, which has a field that alternates soybeans and corn. We're a few minutes away from a small village and about a half an hour away from a large town. I just wanted to give you some background on the area before I share what happened, just in case it helps. Anyway, this year is the corn year in the field behind our house, which I always hate because I cannot see past the first couple of rows, and it's always had that creepy vibe to it. Before crops are planted, I like to rock hound and metal detect in the field and surrounding fields, so I know the land real well. I have found Native American artifacts in the field before as well, and there was a couple of wood scattered throughout the fields, and Big Creek runs through it as well. I mainly stick to the field directly behind my house because I don't want to wander too far. The furthest out I have gone is probably no more than a mile. Anyway, I was out with my dog walking along the line of dirt between the trees in the back of the property and the field when my dog starts to growl at the corn. It obviously scared the heck out of me, and I was yelling at him, telling him to stop. When I was little, we would get coyotes around here as well, so I figured maybe it was a coyote. Since they didn't want myself or my dog hurt by coyotes, I started walking back to the house, but my dog wasn't having any of it. He was pulling on his leash, baying and howling and losing his mind. He doesn't usually bay or howl like this unless he's squirrel hunting, so the fact that he's screaming into the corn worried me. We started walking again, then I heard this meow from the corn. I was like, oh, okay, it's just a cat. But I have a cat, and there's plenty of barn cats that cross our property, and my dog has never lost his mind over a cat like this before. So I keep tugging on his leash, and I'm like, dude, let's go, you're freaking me out. The cat starts meowing and getting uncomfortably loud for a cat's meow. It sounded like it was much closer than it was. Then the cat started growling, but it sounded like a huge dog, like huge growls. Then the corn started rustling, bigger than what a cat would do. Luckily, at that point, I was just about back to the house, and the growling kind of developed into what sounded like a yell scream from a person. I was dragging the dog. My dog is growling. His hair is on the back, sticking straight up. I was scared and shaking, and I was absolutely terrified. Finally make it back to the house, and I tell my family what happened, and they're all like, okay, cool, whatever. I'm terrified and in tears, and to this day I still don't know what I encountered. Today's fifth experience. When I was serving in Afghanistan, I witnessed strange stuff. First of all, I didn't see any creatures, but I encountered stuff. One of the roles I served was essentially Hearts and Minds role. We made the effort to get to know the locals and to get them to look at us in a better light, just by simple things like giving out food, building things, and bringing their kids toys like basketballs and footballs and soccer balls, etc. One family we met with was a family of goat farmers. Over the weeks, we became pretty friendly and shared experiences through our translator. One day I was talking to him about his goats and how hard life must be out here. He said it's fine, but the one thing that bothers him is the Ba'at. I thought initially it was a local Taliban strongman or something, but he said no, an animal. Now, this next part is said through a translator, so bear in mind that. He said it's a running wolf, the translator, and I really didn't know what he meant. But he just said again, a wolf that runs like a man. He then asks us to follow him. Initially I refused, but eventually relented as I felt he wouldn't lead us to danger, and it may offend him more if not. He led us to a cave 30 minutes away. In this cave we found what looked like crude drawings on the wall. Nothing you could make out well, but definitely something someone had drawn by scraping rock. But more disturbing was several gouged lines in the rock, about 1/3 of an inch deep and about a foot long. We had joked about it, but I tried cutting a similar mark into the wall with my knife. I couldn't do it, bear in mind. I've been powerlifting since I was 16, so I'm pretty strong, but couldn't even come close. The biggest red flag, however, was the remains of what I believe was a goat carcass. Now, this cave is about 300 yards up, about a 60% incline. I don't know how a fox, which is the only predator I saw out here, could kill a goat, drag it up from the closest farm, a mile and a half away, up that slope into the mountains. But to be honest, it really freaked me out. For the remaining 3 months of my tour, I heard noises that sounded like a woman wailing. Might be something, or might just be a grown man being scared by a herder's story. I'm not weighing in on if they are real or not, but I did find it was compelling. That was tonight's second half. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Enjoyed sharing it with you. I am completely drained from my trip, guys. I'm sorry if there was mistakes in it. I'm going to try to get some rest tonight, but I do have an interview coming up, and so I probably won't get any sleep. Well, good sleep, but maybe I'll get some this week. And anyway, guys, have a great night, and thank you for all your support. May the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.